Let's turn our attention now to England, way up there. We haven't really been hanging out there a lot. So, what's going on in England during the High Renaissance period? England at this time is ruled by Henry VIII, and here is a portrait of Henry VIII, King of England. Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am. Goodness gracious. Henry, King of England at this time, is trying to become a cultural force in Europe. He is expanding his influence in the north and in the west with these maritime trade. He wants to expand his naval power, and he wants to establish England as a cultural powerhouse. He wants people to look to England, and so we see a beautiful rise and flourishing of the arts during this period in Renaissance. Now, in terms of religion, Henry is Catholic, and his wife, Catherine, is also Catholic. Now, I'm going to get into the story of them a bit because it is crazy drama, and if you're not familiar with it, or, I mean, even if you are familiar with it, I mean, it's everywhere. There's miniseries, there's movies, there's books, it's all over the place talking about Henry and the drama that I'm going to talk about right now. So let's start off with Henry. Henry is the second-born son to the King and Queen of England. His older brother, Arthur, is intended to inherit the throne. However, Arthur is a very sickly child, and the King and Queen of Spain, in order to connect or align themselves with the powerhouse of Spain, they marry Arthur to the Princess of Spain. Her name is Catherine. Now, Catherine of Aragon is her former title. Catherine of Aragon is not just any princess. She is the daughter to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, the two people that sent Columbus to go find a shorter route to India. Yeah, that's their daughter. Now, she's 16 years old, and she's sent up to England to marry the 15-year-old Arthur. And the 10-year-old Henry is just kind of hanging around. But Henry has like a super crush on her. She's really cute. It's a pretty 16-year-old with this like sexy Spanish accent, right? And about a year into their marriage, the sickly Arthur dies. The King and Queen of England don't want to lose this alliance with Spain, and therefore have Henry marry Catherine. Now, this union, you might sound like, ew, that sounds gross, but according to court records, Catherine and Arthur never consummated the marriage. They never did it because Arthur was so sickly. And so the marriage between Catherine and Henry is then approved by all. Okay, so they're madly in love. Henry grows up and he's like turned into this major hunk. I know, you're looking at this and you're like, that's no hunk. But this is when he's older. But he was a total dreamboat when he was younger. He was taller than average. He was muscular. He was handsome. He had this like cute, brassy red ginger hair and beard. And he loved to go horseback riding. So he had these like big, thick muscle thighs and this strong torso. And he was in love with Catherine. Catherine was in love with him. In fact, their union was seen as not only this perfection of a couplehood, but also this force of Catholicism, because Catherine and Spain were firmly Catholic, and England and Henry were firmly Catholic. And so their marriage, their union, was this religious force of Catholicism that was in counter to the Reformation. Okay, perfect, done, right? No. After 20 or so years of marriage, Catherine and Henry had only one surviving child, a daughter. Her name was Mary, Princess of England, and Henry loved Mary. He doted on her all the time. But Mary was a girl, and he desperately wanted a male heir to the throne. And Catherine, now in her 40s, it's not going to happen. And this is a strain on their relationship, on their marriage. And Henry and his affection for her dissolve. And he comes up with a solution to his problem of no male heir. He decides to divorce Catherine and marry a young courtier, Anne Boleyn. Now, the Boleyn family had been a part of Henry's larger court of people, his entourage, and he thought that this young, ambitious English girl could, it's so gross to say this, but was ripe, and if he could marry her, he could have a son. Get a divorce from Catherine, marry Anne. However, this is a big problem because Henry and Catherine are Catholic, and Catholicism does not acknowledge divorce. He would need to get some kind of blessing from the Pope. And what's his argument? They've been married for over 20 years. So Henry, in order to marry Anne, says, oh, well, Catherine was married to my brother before, and they totally did it. And Catherine says, no, and you've been my husband, and no. And the Pope, who is heavily influenced and intimidated by Spain, says, I'm not giving this to you, Henry. You have to stay married to Catherine. Now, Henry, he's not good with rejection, and so he decides, fine, Pope, you won't give me a divorce, but the Protestants and the Reformation allow for divorce. I'm going to become a Protestant. And many of his advisors who had been in support of the Reformation had already been encouraging him to join the Protestant Reformation and leave Catholicism. And so he sees this as another benefit. This religious conflict erupts in England as citizens are falling in line with the Reformation and citizens are falling on the side of Catholicism. Henry decides that he's going to make his own version of Protestantism. It's referred to the Church of England and Episcopal. Those are two terms that you hear about it. And I'm not going to get into the details of the theology, but it has a structure remarkably similar to Catholicism, a hierarchy, but with elements of Protestantism. And the figure in charge of the Church of England is the King of England, Henry. So after establishing the Church of England, he says, and I can get a divorce. He gets a divorce from Catherine. He marries Anne Boleyn. She immediately is pregnant. She gives birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is not a son. And Anne Boleyn has many enemies, and they convince Henry to not trust her. And so he finds her guilty of treason. He executes Anne Boleyn. Catherine, who he sent up to a cold, drafty castle away from him, has died. Mary and Elizabeth, his two princesses, are estranged from their father. And he marries again and again and again. So one of the reasons Henry VIII is so well known is because of Henry's 6 wives. He was first married to Catherine and then to Anne Boleyn. So he was first married to Catherine of Aragon, Princess of Spain. He divorced her to marry Anne Boleyn. He executed Anne Boleyn to marry Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was another young English woman of the court. Jane becomes pregnant and she gives birth to a son named Edward. However, she dies rather suddenly after because of complications from childbirth. And Edward, their son, is sickly. And so he marries again. He marries Anne of Cleves. Here's Anne of Cleves. However, he has their marriage annulled in the same year because apparently she wasn't as pretty as her picture. So she like lied in her Tinder profile. And he then goes on to marry again. He marries Catherine Howard. He gets a divorce from her 2 years later, and then he marries Catherine Parr. So in the total, he had 6 wives. And of those 6 wives, he had Mary from Catherine, Elizabeth from Anne Boleyn, and Edward from Jane. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Because it's part of a larger drama. If you want to know more about the life of Henry VIII and all of this, it's, you could find it out there. I'm just going to give you some spoilers. So, spoiler alert. Okay, when Henry dies, his son Edward takes the throne, but Edward is very young, very sickly, and he dies at the young age of 15. When he dies, then Mary takes the throne. Now, Mary has felt extremely betrayed and ignored and disrespected by her father and by the king, by the people of England, and she decides to return England to its Catholic past. And this then requires a large religious persecution of the Protestants living in England. Mary then earns the nickname Bloody Mary. The vodka drink, yes, and the scary tales of Bloody Mary. It's Mary, Catherine's and Henry's daughter. Mary never has a successful pregnancy, and she dies, what we believe, from some form of cancer. When she dies childless, then Elizabeth takes the throne. Now, she becomes Queen Elizabeth I. Like the great queen in the Cate Blanchett movies, Queen Elizabeth. Yeah. Queen Elizabeth, who was the younger sister to Mary, the older sister to Edward, she becomes queen, and she has her own amazing story. We're not going to get into it in this class. It's not because it's not valid or awesome. We just don't have a lot of time. And so we're going to instead look at the portrait of Henry that we see here in more detail. And I'm giving you all of this information as a way to kind of give you a reference point for the artwork that we're now going to look at in detail. Okay? Oh, here, look at that. Annulled, executed, died, divorced, executed, widowed. Oof! My goodness gracious. Okay. So here's our artwork. This is by the court painter Hans Holbein the Younger. Now, Hans Holbein, he is the premier painter to the King of England, Henry, which means like he is the go-to painter for all court nobility paintings, okay? When we see this portrait, we're supposed to easily recognize Henry as the King of England, and in the background, it tells us the year. The year, it says Anno Etas. The year is 1540. Okay, nice. And what do we see happening? He's just standing there? No, he's not just standing there. Let's look at this in more detail and figure out what Henry is trying to tell us. Because in 1540, Henry is now, what has happened in his life? He has established the Church of England. He has annulled Catherine. He has executed Anne. Jane Seymour has just died, and he is now on the market looking for a new bride. By this time, the hunky ginger is no more. He's older, he's got some middle-aged weight. Also, he had fallen off of his horse and gotten this really bad leg injury that didn't heal quite right, so it was kind of like rotten and gangrenous. So he's not getting as much physical activity as before. He's really plump, and he's angry and just mean, and ugh, okay. So, let's talk about the characteristics of this as a Renaissance artwork, specifically of Northern Europe. The flat background in the back, yep, That's totally a Northern European thing to see. And then the way he's filled this space, this composition from his sleeves on either end, it's making it very big, right? He's filling up this space. And I want you to look at him a little bit closer. And what kind of a personality does he have? What he's wearing. From our understanding of clothing, jewels, fabrics, fur. Okay, he's holding here in his one hand, he's got these riding gloves he would wear when he's holding the reins. And then in his other, resting on his belt loop, he's holding on to the hilt of a dagger. Wow, okay. Now, if we were in class together, I would ask you that question again. What kind of a guy is this? What kind of a personality does he have? Like, I know you know how to judge people. You know how to look at people and say, like, oh, she's a snob. Oh, he's a brat. So what do you think about this person? Imagine he came into our classroom. What would you think? Arrogant? Mean? Intimidating? Do you think he'd allow us to ignore him? No way. He fills up this painting as he would fill up the room. Let's look at the fashion choices here. So the portrait of a person is not only stating their physical likeness, but their status. And he is King of England. So this is the status of England. And the kind of decadence of gold, silk, embroidered textures and tapestries, this red velvet vest and tunic, all of these, this big, thick chain that's covered or encrusted with jewels and pearls. These tiny little white marks here, those are slashing. So he's got some kind of a fine undershirt. And then these cut open parts of the vest, you would tuck or pinch out the fine linen. So it creates this wonderful texture, right? Going down. It's very fashionable. It's very expensive. Look at all that kind of handiwork, the manipulation of gold thread. That's like real gold thread. And then like this giant gold chain. I mean, we know people wear gold chains now and it's a statement of wealth. He's got that going on. So the wealth that he's displayed here isn't just of his personal wealth, but it's the wealth of England. And the way he fills up this space, he and England are dominating this painting, right? In terms of the composition, how Hans Holbein has placed his hands, his face, the shoulders, even when he's turned just slightly, he doesn't narrow his frame. Those sleeves billow out. And then that chain is echoed in the fine feathered cap that he wears. He's not wearing his crown. Why? Because he doesn't need to. His presence is kingly enough. He doesn't need to add these, these unnecessary adornments, such as a crown and a scepter. He is the king. You know he's your king. What about his hands? Remember, hands are another element that reveal the personality, the energy of that person. He's got his riding gloves in his hand. So it's like he's out for a ride. He can go. He's a hunter. He's a mover. He not only loves to ride horses, but he loves to hunt. Hunt what? Dominate. Overpower nature. Overpower you. So he's got his hunting gloves. Not to say that he's going to go out and like hunt you, but he's a rider. He's saying, yeah, I know I'm a little bit chubby now, but I still ride. I still got my riding gloves on. I could still ride a big horse. Yeah, I'm getting morbidly obese, and I have gout, and I have this rotten leg, but I still ride. I still ride. So speaking of his health, his athleticism, and then he's resting his hand on top of his dagger. Now, in today's world with guns, sharp blades don't have the same kind of threat of violence as they used to, but this is before guns. And you kill people by poking them with sharp things, like a dagger. And not everybody was allowed to have a knife, a sharp blade. There were levels of society that did not have those rights. And here, Henry, displaying his right to have this defense, and it's like encrusted in jewels and gems. It's speaking to the defense of England. It's speaking to the defense and wealth of England. And then as you're a king, holding a blade while looking at you, he's trying to intimidate you. I mean, think about it. If we were to switch out the dagger for like, a handgun, and imagine a leader like the president of our school. Imagine walking past a, big portrait, official portrait of the president of our community college, and they have, their nice outfit on, they're smiling, but then like their hand is just resting on this like handgun. What kind of a leader is that? What are they telling you? How do they rule that school? How does he rule England? By force, by intimidation. You get in my way, I cut you. So it's a lot happening here. And Hans Holbein is very delicately and diplomatically presenting Henry, portraying him.